They thought he was just another burden. A boy in a wheelchair, hands curled tightly, head tilted softly, unable to speak, unable to order, unable to complain. He just sat there, kid, hungry, waiting. They passed him by like he was a coat rack, like he didn't exist. They rolled their eyes when I asked for help. One waiter muttered, "You'd think people like that wouldn't come to places like this." Another one laughed, right there, in front of my son. They didn't know I heard it. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know that the man sitting silently across from that boy owned the very building they worked in, that I signed their paychecks, that I designed the layout of this restaurant to be inclusive, that I built this place after my wife passed so my son could eat out in peace, without judgment. But what they also didn't know was that someone else was watching too. A young waitress, yet overlooked. She walked up, knelt beside him, and without a word began to feed him spoon by spoon. She didn't flinch. She didn't make a scene. She just cared. And in that moment, everything changed. Not for her. Not yet. But it would. Because I wasn't just going to punish the ones who mocked him. I was going to honor the one who saw him. And when I did, I made sure the whole restaurant would never forget it. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 45 years old, a single father, and the owner of 5 restaurants across the Midwest each, one named after the woman who taught me how to love through food. Claire Stable. My late wife's name was Claire. She passed away 7 years ago. But her values, dignity, patience, kindness live in every detail of the places we built together. From the quiet corners for elderly guests to the wider aisles designed for wheelchairs. Everything had meaning. Because Claire didn't just believe in food. She believed in presence. Our son, Elijah, was born with a neurological condition that limits his speech and motor function. He's 14 now, sharp as a knife inside. Can't speak a word, but that kid sees everything. He reads people better than most adults I know, and he feels it. When someone looks at him like he's broken, when someone pretends he's not there, when someone decides he's not worth their time. So we built these restaurants so he'd always have a seat. But life gets busy. Lately, I've spent more time in meetings than in booths. I trusted our general managers. Trusted that the culture we created would hold. Until one of Elijah's aides told me something offhand a few weeks ago. "Mr. Reed, Elijah's last visit to Claire's table downtown, the staff ignored him the whole time. Wouldn't even make eye contact. I thought she was mistaken. But then I read a review online. Beautiful decor. Average food. But the staff didn't hide their discomfort when a disabled boy came in. It was awkward to watch. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was public, but because it was true. And because that location, the downtown flagship, was the one Claire and I opened together. I needed to see it for myself. So last Friday, I put on jeans and a black ball cap. No fanfare. No corporate walkthrough. Just me and Elijah. We wheeled in through the side entrance, like any father and son would. Saturday near the back window, I didn't tell anyone who I was. And I waited to see how they'd treat a boy who couldn't tip, who wouldn't post about them online, who couldn't say thank you but could feel everything. I watched the host barely glance at Elijah before seating us. I watched a waitress sigh and skip our table twice. I watched 2 busboys stare at him, then whisper something that made them both laugh. And through it all, Elijah sat still, calm, resigned, like he'd been through this before. My heart cracked open, but I didn't say a word, because I was waiting not just to catch someone in the act, but to see if anyone still remembered what this place was built for. And then, she came, a waitress, brown apron, hair in a messy bun, maybe 22. Artisan. Didn't say much. Didn't judge. Just knelt beside Elijah. Met his eyes. and gently lifted a spoon. That single act, that quiet kindness, it was louder than all the cruelty in the room. And I knew this story wouldn't end the way they expected. The first cut didn't come from what they said. It came from what they didn't do. We sat there for 9 minutes, unattended, unseen. Waiters buzzed by, menus in hand, trays lifted, polite smiles aimed at well-dressed couples and laughing groups of friends. But us, nothing. I caught one of my young blonde guy in a tight white shirt make eye contact with me, then flick his eyes toward Elijah and immediately look away. Like seeing my son made him uncomfortable. Like kindness was something optional now. Eventually, he approached, slapped 2 menus down without a word and walked off. No greeting, no water, no welcome to Claire's, just silence. As if Elijah's presence was a mess to be avoided, not a guest to be welcomed. Elijah didn't move. He never does in moments like that. But I could feel the tension in his hands, a slight tremble. The way he blinked longer than usual is his way of saying, I know. Dad, it's happening again. 2 tables over. I heard a hostess whisper behind the partition. Why even bring him to a place like this? It's just going to make everyone uncomfortable. Another replied, I had to serve a guy like that once. Took forever. Zero tip. They weren't even trying to hide it. And that's what hit the hardest. It wasn't shock. It was familiarity. Like they'd said it before. Like this wasn't the first time Elijah had been treated as less than human in a place bearing his mother's name. I looked down at my boy. He stared out the window. Yaf said, I still. No child should have to develop the skill of emotional armor. But Mine had to. And that day, he wore it well. Too well. When the blonde server came back finally, he didn't even acknowledge Elijah. Just looked at me and said, You ordering for both? I nodded slowly. We'll just have the tomato soup. 2. Please. 1 needs to be pureed. The waiter didn't write it down. He just shrugged. Kitchen slammed. It'll take a while. Then he walked off. No eye contact. No reassurance. Just the same empty service he gave my son. Nothing. I reached for my water glass, but my hand froze halfway because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just a culture issue. This wasn't just a bad shift. This was what indifference looks like when no one's watching. And they thought no one was watching. Because to them, Elijah was just another problem to ignore. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't just a father. I was the founder. And I was watching everything. We sat in the corner booth for over 30 minutes. No refill. No follow-ups. No warmth. Elijah's soup came out lukewarm. Untouched. Placed in front of him with no spoon. Mine came 10 minutes later, no apology. No eye contact. Just a plate set down like a burden. When I asked for a straw, the server rolled his eyes. Straws are behind the counter. I looked at him, then at my son, then back at him. He didn't flinch. I nodded, said nothing, because I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to observe one from where I sat. I watched other tables receive full attention. Glass refilled, bread baskets refreshed, jokes, compliments. Let me know if you need anything. But for us, nothing. It wasn't just that they were rude. It was that they were comfortable being rude. I studied them, one by one. Josh, the server. The blonde one, overconfident, sloppy with manners. Tina, the hostess, sharp tongue, fake smile, a people pleaser, until real empathy was needed. Dan, the floor, manager absent, either in the back or glued to his phone. None of them checked on Elijah. None of them even asked if he was enjoying his food. And all of them had forgotten where they were. Because Claire's table wasn't built for cool. It wasn't built for Instagram aesthetics or fast service. It was built for the forgotten, for people who needed a moment of peace in a world that rarely gave it. Claire used to say, "The kindest service is the one no one notices but everyone remembers." No one in that restaurant had remembered, except one person, the girl from early Elena. Short, geared, tucked behind the espresso station, brown apron, hair messy from the lunch rush, shoes clearly secondhand. I noticed how she paused when she passed us, how her eyes softened when she looked at Elijah, how she quietly grabbed a straw from the back without being asked. Then, she did something I'll never forget. Without a word, she knelt down beside him, scooped a spoonful of soup, and gently offered it. Waited for his nod, fed him, slowly, gently, patiently, like she'd done it 1,000 times. And when he smiled his tiny, are barely there, smile, she smiled back. No pity, no noise, just presence. Then she stood up, nodded at me, and walked off without saying a word. She didn't know I was the owner. She didn't do it for credit. She did it because someone needed kindness, and she still remembered how to give it. I watched her for the next 15 minutes. Every table she served, how she treated with the same care. And that's when I decided she wasn't just going to get a thank you. She was going to get everything she deserved in front of the same people who ignored her. And the ones who ignored my son. Because not all heroes wear capes. Some wear worn shoes, faded aprons, and carry quiet courage in their hands. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed the entire lunch in my head like it was a surveillance tape. Every gesture, every snub, every second Lena knelt by my son and reminded me why I built this place. The next morning, I called my assistant and asked her to quietly pull 3 things. Internal complaint logs from the downtown location, staff evaluation reports from the last quarter, and the last 2 months of customer reviews mentioning service. Within 2 hours, I had it all in my inbox. The results were sobering. 3 anonymous staff complaints described a cold, toxic work culture. Customers mentioned feeling invisible if they didn't fit the vibe. One comment specifically called out a server named Josh for mocking an elderly man who asked for help using the bathroom. It wasn't just a bad shift. It was a slow rot, the kind that grows in silence, while people at the top get too busy to notice. That was on me. But Lena, she was different. Her name showed up in 3 positive reviews unprompted. Words like gentle, understanding, patient with my mom. Yet her evaluations, lukewarm. No upward mobility, no development track. Apparently, she wasn't dynamic enough to lead. What they didn't know was that leadership doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes, it just picks up a spoon and shows up with compassion. So I made a decision. I would return, but this time, not alone, and not in silence. I reached out to our community outreach partner, a local group that supports caregivers and people with disabilities. I asked them to recommend someone who could help me design a training module around empathy-based service. And I told them I wanted Lena involved, paid, credited, and visible. They agreed instantly. I also called HR quietly and asked them to audit the downtown staff, especially management, for any patterns of complaint suppression. Then, I texted the general manager of the location. "I'll be stopping by tomorrow. Don't tell anyone." He replied, "Of course. Want me to prep the staff?" "No." I said, "I want to see what they do when they think no one's watching. Because tomorrow wouldn't just be a surprise visit. It would be the beginning of a reckoning. But not for revenge alone. For restoration. For the boy in the wheelchair who deserved more than silence. For the mother whose name hung above every doorway. And for the girl in the brown apron, who reminded me that the soul of this place hadn't died. It had just been quietly surviving. And now, I was going to bring it back. Saturday afternoon, The same table, the same spot near the window. But this time, I was alone. No Elijah, no disguise, no announcement. Just a man in a leather jacket, quietly sipping coffee from the booth where his son was once forgotten. I wasn't there to test anyone. I was there to watch them reveal who they already were. From the moment I walked in, I noticed the difference between those who greeted me and those who scanned me for importance. Tina, the hostess, didn't recognize me without Elijah. She smiled politely, but with glazed eyes. Josh, the blonde server, was leaning on the counter, chatting with a waitress, laughing like someone who'd never been held accountable a day in his life. Dan, the floor manager, glanced up from his tablet long enough to see me sit, then went right back to scrolling. They were all right where I left them. Bulena, Lena noticed me instantly, not with panic, not with confusion, with presence. She walked by once, made eye contact, gave a slight nod of acknowledgement not to perform, but to serve, and she returned a few minutes later, placed a glass of water on the table, and said softly, "Good afternoon. If you need anything, I'm just over there." No big smile, no awkward energy, just awareness. I watched her move through the floor like a quiet kern steady, attentive, invisible to those, too loud to notice grace. Then I watched Josh, a man in his 60s, came in with a walker, moved slowly. Josh saw him inside, then pointed the man toward an open booth and called out, "That one's fine. Menus are there. No escort. No help. No care." I wrote it down in my notebook. Then, 10 minutes later, I saw Tina roll her eyes at a young mom trying to juggle a stroller and a toddler. I wrote that down too. I wasn't collecting names. I was collecting proof. Proof of a disease we had allowed to grow in the very place we built for healing. Claire would have called it spiritual mold, and she'd be right. At the end of my meal, Lena approached again. "Would you like anything boxed to go?" I shook my head, but I'd like to speak with Dan, your floor manager. Her eyes flickered just slightly, not fear, more like a quiet knowing. "I'll let him know." Dan came over slowly. "Still chewing gum?" "Hey, you needed something." I looked at him directly. "Yeah, I'm Marcus Reed." His face pale like someone had flipped a switch. "Oh, Isaiah. I didn't know you were." "I know," I said, interrupting, and that's the problem. I stood up. "I'll be back Monday. Bring everyone, staff, managers, kitchen, full team. I have something to share." He nodded stiffly. I didn't explain further, because I needed them all to sit in the unknown, the same way my son had sat, quiet and unseen, while they decided his worth for him. Now it was my turn, not to yell, not to punish, but to illuminate with facts, with grace, and with no room left for denial. Monday, noon. The lunch crowd was still filing in when I arrived this time in a tailored Navy jacket and my name pin that hadn't been worn in years. Marcus Reed, founder. Dan was already waiting, fidgeting near the host stand. He had gathered everyone as I'd requested. Floor staff, back of house, kitchen leads, even the new part-time hires. They stood in a loose semicircle near the center of the dining room, some still in aprons, others with folded arms. Customers were still dining. Of course, I hadn't asked them to clear the place, because I wanted this to happen in public. Just like the day they ignored my son, I wanted this reckoning to be witnessed. I walked in without greeting, pulled a slim folder from my bag, opened it slowly, let the silence do the talking. Then I looked at Josh. "Let's begin with this," I said, holding up a printed copy of the customer complaint referencing his behavior last week. Followed by this, I held up another an internal peer complaint filed 4 days ago. And this one-ian, unaired camera screenshot of you ignoring a guest with mobility issues. His face reddened, arms locking over his chest. With all due respect, see ya. I didn't even know he was. You didn't know because you didn't care to find out. Then I turned to Tina. 3 documented instances of dismissive behavior, 2 peer complaints, and a guest feedback card from Saturday that simply read, "Your hostess made me feel small." And to Ivan. Her lip twitched. She looked toward Dan for backup. He stepped forward. "Marcus, if I made these are kids, they have learning curves. We're all human." I nodded slowly. "You're right. We are. Which is why, when someone makes a mistake and owns it, I make room for that." I took a breath, but this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. A culture. One that grew in your store while you were watching your phone. I stepped toward the team, and while all of you looked away, I turned toward Lena. She looked up. Every head turned as I motioned for her to come forward. She hesitated, then stepped out from the edge of the group. She looked nervous, small, but I was about to make sure she never felt that way in this place again. "Lena," I said, "you didn't know who I was when you knelt beside my son. You didn't ask for credit. You didn't perform. You simply chose to care." I held out a sealed envelope. Inside is your promotion letter, effective immediately. You are the new service integrity lead at Claire's Table downtown. Her eyes widened. One hand went to her mouth. This role comes with a pay raise, benefits, and the authority to retrain the entire front-of-house team on how to serve every single guest with dignity. The room was still. Then I added, and she'll be doing that training using a curriculum we're co-developing with the National Disability Advocate Network. Now the customers were watching too. One woman clapped, then another. Then the room broke into quiet applause, subdued, but steady, earned. I turned back to Dan, Josh, and Tina. As for the rest of you, HR will be in touch this afternoon. There will be reviews, there will be decisions, but above all, there will be accountability. Because sometimes the loudest message isn't punishment, it's elevation. And today, the girl no one saw was now the one leading them all. By Tuesday afternoon, the story had left the restaurant. I guess someone I'd never met had posted about the scene on Twitter. Watched a waitress get promoted in the middle of service by the restaurant's founder for showing quiet kindness to a disabled boy. She cried. Everyone clapped. Felt like something good still exists in this world. The post went viral. Thousands of retweets. News outlets reached out. Article popped up titled, "Dignity Served. How one act of kindness redefined leadership at Claire's Table." But behind the headlines, the real change was happening inside our walls. HR launched formal investigations into the behavior of Josh, Tina, and Dan. Josh, after review of camera footage and 3 ignored guest complaints, was terminated with cause. Tina, who initially claimed misunderstanding, was suspended, then resigned. After additional team statements confirmed a pattern of hostility, Dan, the floor manager, was demoted and required to complete a 6-week leadership retraining program under Lena. Yes, owner here, he didn't like it, but I didn't care, because sometimes the only way to reset power is to flip the pyramid. Meanwhile, Lena arrived to work the next day, 15 minutes, early, nervous, polished, prepared. She didn't walk in like a hero. She walked in like a professional. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as she transformed the staff, one conversation at a time. She led service training with warmth, not ego, held small group sessions on invisible guest needs, and quietly modeled everything we once stood for. By week 3, we saw the change in numbers. Guest satisfaction at the downtown location rose 24%. Tips increased across the board, especially for tables involving elderly or special needs guests. And staff turnover dropped to 0. But the most telling sign, one afternoon, I saw Josh outside, just across the street. He looked in through the glass as Lena gave final instructions before the lunch rush. She stood tall, composed, confident. He turned and walked away. That moment wasn't about humiliation. It was about consequence. Because too often, people think rudeness is harmless, that just ignoring someone is no big deal. But when that someone is a child who can't speak up for himself, you better believe it leaves a mark. And now, that mark was being erased. Not by force, but by leadership. The kind Lena had, the kind Dan never showed, the kind Josh never even tried to find. I wasn't looking for revenge, but justice that I would always serve, especially in a place named after a woman who believed food should heal, not harm. Dưới đây là part 9, vinh danh, tái sinh nhân vật chính 600 từ cho Empowered Revenge Story. They mocked my disabled son, she fed him silently. So I changed her life in front of everyone. Part due, restoration, what she built. And what we found again, it had been exactly 1 month since that Monday. Claire's table downtown no longer felt like the same restaurant. The layout hadn't changed. The walls were still the soft beige Claire picked herself. The menu still had her famous lemon thyme soup. But the energy, everything had shifted. I walked in on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced again, but this time not to test. This time, to witness the hostess someone new. Someone trained by Lena greeted me with warmth and ease. She didn't flinch when she saw Elijah next to me. She knelt down, not to baby him, but to meet him at eye level. Hi, Elijah. We've got your table ready by the window, just the way you like it. He smiled, and I nearly lost it right there. We sat. A server arrived within minutes. Water was poured, bread served, and Elijah me boy was offered a small adapted spoon. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because here, now, it was. Lena emerged from the back a few minutes later, clipboard in hand, black slacks, button blouse, calm eyes that held a kind of grounded strength. She didn't look surprised to see us, but she did look proud. Welcome back, she said softly. Lunch is on me today. No, I said, smiling. Lunch is on the house, but dinner's on me. For you and your mom. Saturday, bring her anywhere you want. Her lips parted in surprise. Sir, I don't. Lena, this place exists today because you remembered what everyone else forgot. That service isn't about perfection. It's about presence. And you showed up for my son when no one else did. She blinked, nodded, and whispered, thank you. But that wasn't all. That week, we sent out a company-wide memo, Claire's Integrity Initiative, launching across all 5 locations. Each restaurant would now have a service integrity lead, trained by Lena directly over the next 6 months. Her curriculum, co-developed with advocacy groups, was now our new gold standard. Lena wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was now director of guest care and culture for the entire brand. A salarié role, a personal office at HQ, and a seat at my executive table. She didn't get there because she chased promotion. She got there because she embodied the very heart we lost along the way. Claire would have adored her. She had the same calm soul, the same unshakable decency. Later that week, I watched Elijah finish a bowl of soup, his favorite. He looked out the window, then back at me. His hand reached over the table, and he touched mine lightly. No words, just a gentle squeeze. It was his way of saying, I see it. Dad, you brought it back. And in that moment, I knew This wasn't about cleaning up one store. This was about rebuilding why we ever opened the doors in the first place. Not for profit, not for press, but so that someone, somewhere, I would know they belong without ever having to ask for it. I didn't elevate Lena because she fed my son. I elevated her because she saw him. She didn't look at his chair. She didn't pity his silence. She didn't pause to calculate if helping him was worth the effort. She just showed up with a spoon, with a heart, with human decency. And when someone does that unprompted, unseen, uncelebrated, that's not ordinary service. That's leadership. I didn't fire Josh out of anger. I didn't demote Dan to teach a lesson. I did it because culture doesn't rot all at once. Seed withers in tiny, silent choices. The sighs, the ignored glances, the absence of kindness when no one's watching. So I watched, and then I acted, because the world doesn't change when you yell. It changes when you reward the quiet ones who did right when no one else would. And if that story tells you anything, let it be this. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to care when it matters most. That's how dignity is restored. That's how culture is rebuilt. That's how Claire's table survived. Because one young woman knelt to serve someone others refused to see, and reminded me of everything I once believed in.